Welcome, Wonder Dippers. This is the first podcast I have uploaded, first transmission I've uploaded to YouTube in general, in an absolute age. But if you don't know, we have been active in the audio dimension. In fact, there are over 300 episodes of the Third Eye Drops podcast available right now, wherever you listen to those. But more pressingly, I believe, which is a word I don't use often, is that I think science and spirituality are actually beginning to cuddle up. And this, if you listen to the show, is one of the things that I am just endlessly interested in. In what areas do spirituality, the mythopoetic, the mystical, and the scientific and analytical actually harmonize? Because there is the moving, the meaningful zest of life, I think. And if that dichotomy between the spiritual and the scientific were merged into a single human, it really might be my guest in this Mind Meld, Dr. Lisa Miller. Simply put, my fellow sentient sacks of stardust, you can just feel the authenticity wafting off of her. You can feel the wisdom blowing off of her soul. Lisa is a clinical psychologist and professor of psychology and education at Columbia University Teachers College, and she is the founder of the Spirituality Mind-Body Institute, which is the first Ivy League graduate program in spirituality and psychology. And she's also the best-selling author of the book The Spiritual Child, and her latest, which is an absolute must-read, if you ask me, called The Awakened Brain. And my friends, this podcast did just that for me. We poke reality from many, many angles: psychology, neuroscience, spirituality. We get into misconceptions about depression and anxiety and how we can actually use them instead of allowing them to dominate us. A big through line in this one is why there's this crisis of meaning that's crippling so many of us as well, and what we can do about that, how we can actually empower ourselves, and so much more. But for all on Dr. Lisa Miller, the necessary keyboard mudras are lisamillerphd.com. And my friends, if you enjoy these mind melds, please tickle the algorithms for us by clicking subscribe and the bell and thumbs up here on YouTube, and by reviewing and subbing on your podcast platform of choice, because as I said, we have a back catalog of 300 plus episodes that will definitely not all end up here. You can also support the show and join the ongoing wonder-soaked discourse at our Patreon, which is patreon.com/Third Eye Drops. It is the best way to support your pal, Michael P., and these mind melds. And with that, my friends, let us pierce the portal of this fabulous mind meld with the wise, wonderful Dr. Lisa Miller. All right, Dr. Lisa Miller, it is a true pleasure to have you in the mind meld. I've become aware of your work, I would say, over the last few months, and then synchronistically, a publicist reached out to me with news of your new book, and I got an advance copy of that, and I've been working my way through the beginning. I'm not as far into it as I wish I were, because I have no doubt that as I go through, I'll just have even more questions for you. But to start with, thank you so much for being here, and I'm truly excited for this one.
I'm delighted to be here. It's an honor, and I can't wait to jump in.
The honor is mine. The honor is mine. So, for people who aren't familiar with you, you are the sort of director, I guess, of the Spirituality Mind-Body Institute at Columbia. And that's like a fabulous arrangement of words, and sounds from the title exactly like what I'm interested in. But can you share with people and with me the kind of work you do there and the sort of lenses you use to do that work?
Yeah. So about 10, 12 years ago, I founded the Spirituality Mind-Body Institute as a place where a spiritual perspective was not just welcome, but foundational to intellectual and academic inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
The Institute was founded based on science. I am first and foremost a clinical scientist. And at that point, there was really a very clear signal in hundreds of peer review articles that our lives unfold entirely differently, far more auspiciously, if we cultivate our deep spiritual heart. And it was so essential to health, to thriving, to recovery, that as a clinical psychologist in a clinical psychology program, I thought, this is something that emerging therapists need to learn. This is a body of work that needs to be built out further. We need to bring people together. It's not enough to just keep working in our lab and know that someone across the country might at the same time be working in theirs. We need to convene and
Mm-hmm.
share,
Mm-hmm.
go right up to the edge, the frontier of where each and every one of us are, and then together plunge deeper. And that's what's happened. In the past 10 years, we've had unprecedented joy and energy as people came together to really share their spiritual path, whether they were speaking in the language of science or in their sort of lived experience through their faith tradition or through an existential quest or series of practices. All comers welcome, but
Mm.
it's really a catalytic hub for helping to move forward as a society to a much more spiritually aware, ignited understanding of who we really are and what that means for how we
Yeah.
should treat each other.
Yeah. I mean that's a beautiful endeavor and absolutely the kind of thing that I think this world needs one of these in every city. I mean, I think we need to be having like a network of spiritual scientific centers that are using every kind of methodology to shed light on, how the human mind thrives and how the psyche thrives in general and how we can all thrive together because clearly we're not. I mean, clearly we're in a time of mass divisiveness. We don't even agree on basic facts about what's going on in the world. But before we get into any of that, this has been kind of the holy grail, I think, for a lot of people, right? The somehow merging science and spirituality. But it seems like there's this strange resistance on, kind of tribal resistance if you fall more on one side or the other. Like, of course, if you are a scientist and you're a reductionist and you're a materialist, you're going to kind of maybe even reject the idea that spirituality is anything other than some sort of uh, you know, loosey goosey idea, right? And if you're on the other side, you let's say reject evidence that doesn't sync up with your philosophy or your spiritual viewpoint. So how do you balance that as a scientist to do this work responsibly, and really adhering to scientific principles and data, but also having that wonder, that spiritual disposition? How do you balance that?
It's such a magnificent question. On the one hand, we are knowers in multiple forms. Every single one of us is an empiricist
Hmm.
and a logician. We have logic, we have empiricism, but we also have intuition. And some of our very best choices are made based on a deep hunch. We also, every one of us, are mystical knowers. Most people have had profound transcendent experiences through which
Hmm.
something deep stays with them of great meaning. So every one of us is a knower in multiple forms of epistemology, multiple
Right.
forms of knowing.
Hmm.
And to the extent that we can draw on all forms of knowing, we are making full use of our endowment and we are more able to fully engage life. Now, we did a study. We looked through the MRI at people who availed themselves of multiple forms of knowing, who could ask
Mm.
a question with their head, if you will, a logical question, a driving question, proliferate 4, 10, 15 logical responses, right? But of those possibilities, which one is true? Which one bespeaks the deeper truth? Well, that is known with the so called heart, right? Our
Mm.
intuitive knowing, a different pathway, if you will, or circuit within the brain.
Yeah.
And if we can ask with our head and discover with our heart, or perhaps the other way around, have a moment of illumination with our heart and then discern its significance with our head, then we are
Mm-hmm.
engaging multiple forms of knowing. And when we do that, what we see through the MRI is that we build pathways, effectively highways between regions in the brain. We create myelinated tracks. And someone who is capable of engaging multiple forms of knowing has a fully integrated brain, which is,
Wow.
in neuroscience, effectively a better brain. All systems
Mm-hmm.
go, used online as needed. It's a
Yeah.
fantastic question.
Oh, and it was an even better explanation that has ignited even more questions. So you were speaking of this intuitive, subjective, heart kind of knowing, and you said that there's a different circuit for that. So that's something you can actually measure in the brain. And what is that?
Yes. So in the awakened brain, I share that 90% of our schooling, K-12, when you showed up in kindergarten, what was on your desk? On my desk was a planner. Time to
Mm-hmm.
get planning, right? I learned a great deal K-12 about being tactical and strategic. And if I knew something, I needed to point on the paper to how I knew it and where I'd found it, right? And this form of knowing is in the realm of reality, that is about distinction and separateness and materialism. And that's very important. And is the meat and potatoes of what I call the achieving brain, how to
Mm-hmm.
move from A to B. We've got to do it in life, pay our rent, close the deal, right? Make things happen in our professional life. And at the same time, if we only live in the world of the achieving brain, if we only use that form of awareness, life becomes pretty narrow. It becomes pretty lonely. And when big things happen, wanted or unwanted, life becomes very brittle. It's not enough. Again, we're knowers in multiple forms. And every single one of us, it turns out, is endowed not only with the capacity for this form of closing the deal, strategic achieving awareness, but we're equally endowed with the capacity for what I'm calling awakened awareness, a form of
Mm-hmm.
deep transcendent perception. It is our birthright. How do we know that? Well, science is actually very helpful here. We have a method called a twin study. And a twin study can tell us the extent to which any capacity is hardwired, innate, or entirely socialized, right? So one's political beliefs, those are socialized, right? One's faith tradition, one's religion, that is a gift of the environment as well. But the capacity for spiritual awareness, our deep seat of transcendent perception, not just a belief or an idea, the ability to see, feel, and know into life in a deeper way, that is hardwired. Twin studies show us that it is 1/3 innate, 2/3 environmentally formed,
Mm-hmm.
which means every single one of us has this latent, ready to go. But at the same time, it is center culture, K-12 education, mainstream society, left laid fallow. And by way of analogy, it is a muscle without development. It is
Mm-hmm.
atrophied.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is reminding me, and they may or may not be related, but I remember a few years ago hearing about a device called the God Helmet that could supposedly elicit a mystical experience just by, essentially stimulating certain parts of the brain. And it's funny because it's like yet another opportunity to, use whatever your innate bias happens to be, whether it's pro spiritual or pro material, in that you can say, ah, look, I found spiritual experiences. It's just this part of the brain being stimulated. That's all it is. Look, I can make you have one right now. Or you can say, no, we are innately tuned to have these experiences. And this proves it's even more significant. And it
Okay,
seems,
so that's
yeah,
big. That's big,
yes,
right? And you're on to the epic question at this moment. The last century behind us was hardcore materialist. The
right.
brain makes thoughts, right?
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm,
increasingly, as you're suggesting, people are open to the idea that perhaps the brain is an antenna that receives thoughts, or perhaps the brain is a materialization, a reification of consciousness, right?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And when we think about that, it would make sense that when we meditate, when we have transcendent experiences, we start to see synaptogenesis, right?
mm,
We start to see change in the brain. So the most, um, you know, impartial way to say this is simply to say that consciousness has a docking station in the brain and they go
mm,
hand in hand. It doesn't claim biological reductionism. It doesn't claim that what's primary is consciousness. My own view is that consciousness is primary and it takes form with or without material expression.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, and I'm very with you. I definitely harmonize with you there, or at least that's my admittedly that is my bias because I don't have the scientific data to back it up. But what I do have is a growing number of very brilliant people who are actually involved in academia that agree with you, or they agree with you, or they're open minded to what you're postulating. At least, I've had people like Dr. Donald Hoffman on the show, some panpsychist philosophers like Philip Goff, also Annika Harris. She's the wife of Sam Harris. She wrote a book called Conscious a couple of years ago, and I'm sure you're aware of Sam's work. He's coming at this from the angle of somebody who's uh, typically included in this group of quote unquote new atheists, but even Sam and Annika seem to be very open to this idea of panpsychism, and they seem to be quick to say, we can't just discuss consciousness in terms of like brain states or neuronal complexity or something like that. Like there really is more to these like subjective qualia than just a complex brain. So it's something that seems like it holds water, and I'm very very interested in this hard problem of consciousness, sort of Chalmers question. It sounds like you are too.
And science has some pretty interesting findings to throw into the mix here. So, for instance, in The Awakened Brain, I share a story by Achterhoff in
Mm,
which you might envision two different MRI machines, one on the 10th floor and one on the second floor of a building,
mm,
completely separated
mm-hmm,
materially. And on the 10th floor is the traditional healer. And as he or she starts to work to heal the patient, right, 8 floors below, a predictable pattern, time and time again, starts to show up in an MRI machine.
mm,
Now, what's remarkable is that within instants, that same pattern, 9 out of 10 times, suddenly appears in the patient's brain in a separate
oh
MRI on a
wow.
separate floor, which is evidence of shared consciousness in two
Yeah.
localities, what Larry Dossey calls one mind, what increasingly in science we're calling post-materialism, that
Mm,
beyond the strict materialist paradigm is a consciousness-based model that allows us to say that consciousness exists independent of matter, consciousness exists in and through as expressed in matter. One consciousness field in two different brains, expressed as two different brains, 8 floors apart, registered simultaneously in MRI machines. And MRI machines is lovely evidence of shared consciousness, one consciousness in two places.
yeah. Yeah, this kind of non-locality,
Yes.
it's something that I really feel like the environment around it is changing, because it seemed like it was really only discussed in sort of, more fringe channels or studies even 5 or 10 years ago. But now it seems like you can only dam up the data for so long or dismiss the data for so long, and then it starts getting repeated and repeated, and it seems like you have to take it seriously, right?
So I think my great hope for the world right now comes from the fact that I think most Gen Z and even most millennials
Hmm.
are implicitly post materialists, that the lived
Mm,
reality of most people in their 20s, early 30s is one that understands there is a consciousness field in and through us, that, you know, we know each other not based on our shallow packaging, man, woman, white, black, North Coast, West Coast. We know each other through our phone, through the internet, on consciousness. Our connections are based on consciousness. And we pull information out of the thin air. It didn't have to go through telephone lines. So there's really an implicit understanding that consciousness is primary. And what needs to get up online is that science needs to catch up with the tidal wave shift
mm,
in awareness. And what has to catch up is that as Gen Z and millennials inherit the mantle of power and control in society, decisions are going to be made based on the real perception, the accurate awareness that we are one. We are profoundly interconnected. Yes, we are also distinct, But the 20th century got us in a lot of trouble by thinking we are only distinct. That if a bomb is dropped on Vietnam, it has nothing to do with us here. If
Mm-hmm.
people are
Mm-hmm.
dying in China, it has nothing to do with people dying here. The suffering we've been through is an artifact of 20th century thinking. It's people in decision making positions who think in terms of separateness. If something happens in China, it is happening in here. We are one. And the generation that's rising up now is not going to make those same mistakes. You're not just going to fix the old mistakes, you're going to reboot a society which is based on a deep awakened awareness of who we really are and how life is truly built.
Mm-hmm.
That is hopeful. And that
Mm-hmm.
is every reason to get past the malaise now. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so with you. I so deeply feel that. And yes, like the speed of thought, the speed of emotion is getting down to this, millisecond level now where we're sharing ideas in near real time. You're seeing the turnover of novelty in such a staggeringly fast way now. I remember like just thinking back to the early internet days, how, some kind of funny video, even just to use a silly example, like some kind of like funny video would circulate for months and months and months, and now a meme is just like done within a week. It's like, oh yeah, man, I laughed at that like 2 days ago, or you know and that's a silly example, but I think
I mean,
it's
it's right.
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
right. And I think that because of that awareness, the pain and suffering that right now young adults are facing, the rates of depression, of
Yeah.
addiction, of suicidality are at all times high in our society, but they load most heavily onto the shoulders of young adults. People
Hmm.
18 through 25, half the people walking around right now, young adults, full of energy, are depressed.
Yeah.
And that is because people are saying, what kind of world have you handed us? What is going on that you have handed us such suffering, such brokenness, such environmental disaster, such cacophony between nations? I'm on, line all the time and I hear this. And yet this is something that is going to be resolved. This is, what everything the awakened brain is about. This is the depression that is a knock at the door that says we need a new way of living. And it's the energetic, creative mind that you're describing that's going to say, yes, the depression is accurate. This is no way to live.
Hmm.
Depression is a call for a deeper way of living. Depression is a scream that this way isn't working. And
Yeah.
it's going to be the millennials, it's going to be the Gen Z that say, we're going to live another way. And in fact, even before COVID, the way that people, Gen Z millennial treat each other is so full of love, is so full of care, is so full of seeing deeply into who people are, and is so innovative, as you say, that I think COVID has accelerated the evolution of our society.
Hmm. Hmm. I, yeah, I mean, it certainly has. I feel like we're constantly in this tension between, on one hand, careening toward this more awakened, more connected way of being, and absolute disaster, and it feels like one of them has to win out. And I hold out optimism. I really am a more optimistic person than a pessimistic person. But as you point out, there is a depression epidemic, there is a suicide epidemic. And if I remember the numbers correctly, I believe that the suicide numbers skew actually toward more affluent groups, like people like in white, higher income male
Right.
groups are like most likely to kill themselves. And I wanted to bring up more on the MRI scans of the brain, but I think this will circle back into it, because I also had in my notes that I wanted to ask you about depression and the philosophy of depression, and the sort of prevailing, again, materialistic theory that, okay, here's what depression is. It's it's an imbalance of neurotransmitters. You need to get on an SSRI, and fix your levels of serotonin, and then we'll dial you in and you'll be good, and your depression will be cured, if not treated, and you'll be ready to live your life in a more productive, happy, healthy way, right? Like that's sort of, at least to, I think, the layperson, is the gist of the clinical view of depression. But in watching and reading your material, I feel like there's a bit more philosophical nuance to your view on that topic. Could you unpack that?
Well, you've spelled it out perfectly that, we're knee deep in a model of depression, which is a fix it model. Something's broken and let's fix it. You take this pill, your thinking is bad, you take this different thought, we're going to fix you up so that you are happy, you are more functional. It's really an industrial view of
Right.
who we
Yeah.
are, that we need to be fixed, like the carburetor needs to be replaced, and then we'll move more smoothly. But there's a lot of science that, taken in aggregate, suggests a very different view of depression. The first is that I've spent 20 years studying depression at multiple levels of analysis, at the level of MRI, at the level of genotyping, at the level of long-term clinical course studies. And I'm going to share just 2 or 3 findings and let
Please. Yeah.
our listeners discover together with us what actually might be going on, if that's okay.
Oh, please. Yes, please.
Okay. So the first is, we looked at people who recovered from depression, not through medication, but through a deepening of inner life, through a deepening of spiritual awareness, and had a breakthrough. And when they did, we looked at people, these people were mean age 26, right? What we found is that they had developed a very, very strong personal spirituality. And in fact, if you go around and you talk to people 25, 26, 27, those who have a very profound spiritual life, who feel connected, feel that life is loving and guiding, who sense that we're part of a larger symphony, that what happens here has everything to do what happens in Vietnam and China. We're connected and one, love guided and held. Those folks are 2.5 times more likely to have suffered in the past 10 years.
Oh, wow.
People who, with a deep spiritual awareness, have been through a road of trials, have felt pain, and were called by that pain to look at life more deeply and figure out, who really am I in this world? And actually, what more deeply is the nature of life? So those with a strong spiritual core in their mid-20s are 2.5 times more likely to have been depressed, major depression, in the past 10 years. Now, let's stick with those folks and look out upon the horizon over the next 10 years, from age 26 to 36. What we find is that, having established this seat of awareness, what I'm calling the awakened brain, the capacity to see into life more deeply, we are now 75% less likely, 3/4 less likely, to have another major depression over the next 10 years.
Wow.
And if we happen to be at high risk, mom was depressed, life has been hard, maybe I don't have enough resources, we're actually 90% less likely. In fact, the more suffering that could feasibly come our way, the more likely that how I sit with that is in a deep state, a spiritual response to loss, disappointment, such that I don't hit a deep major depression again. So, when you see that the spiritual core is built from suffering, and that once built is a form of protection and resilience against recurrence, then we have to say there's something about the developmental path of adult spiritual growth and flourishing, the evolution of adult spiritual awareness, that has everything to do with suffering and its foment and its metabolism. Now, can I do one more scientific fact?
Of course.
Okay.
Please.
We then looked at the brains of those very same people. And what we found was that sustained spiritual life, now from 26 to 36, 38, was associated with thick, rich cortex. I mean, cortex is processing power. So people with a sustained spiritual life effectively had greater processing power in regions of the brain, the parietal, occipital, and precuneus, regions of reflection, perception, and orientation. So I could live in the same family, in the same apartment building, and have the same job and the same friends, and it all looks different looking through my thick, nice, awakened brain.
Yeah.
Now,
Yes.
with eight,
Yeah. Oh,
I
continue.
beg
No,
one
continue.
last
Yes.
little
Yes.
wrinkle,
Please. Please.
and then
Please.
we'll run.
Yeah.
With 80% of overlap, those nice thick regions of the awakened brain are not thick but thin in people who have recurrent major depression, offering evidence that sustained spiritual life, awakened living, is neuroprotective against recurrent depression. I mean, that says we're looking at two sides of the same coin.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it makes me think too of that imaging study that was done of the advanced meditators. I believe they had like shrunken amygdalas and they had thickened PFCs, just like you're talking about. Um, Forgive me if my my neurology is off there, but it was something to that effect. And what you're talking about is just so foreign, I think, to the way that most people live their lives in this very sheltered, temperate bubble where, oddly, by having all of our needs met, we're contributing to our depression and our listlessness, right? And there has to be, and this has like become a core part of my own philosophy. And I've actually been in the very painful process of trying to construct a book around this idea, is that there's a kind of struggle that we badly need. And it's a sort of like initiatory struggle that, we have nothing built around in our culture around this kind of initiatory struggle. And even the spiritual paths that are at our disposal are pretty absent of this direct experience and this direct interfacing with a sort of meaningful struggle. So I think this is why you're seeing, this renewed interest in plant medicines and shamanism and, even kind of like proxy ordeal initiations, like things like cold exposure and extreme sports, because all of these things put you in touch with this. And, over the years of doing podcasts, I've come across multiple instances of these things from people like, you might be aware of Wim Hof, who, he holds all these world records in submerging his body in cold water and ice, but he does it because he's a yogi, and it's like a deeply spiritual thing for him, and he refers to the cold as his teacher. And I've also had a filmmaker on the show who made um, a documentary about extreme endurance running, and it's about this 3,000 mile 60-70 day long foot race that people do. And the only people that finish it, like the world record holder who wins time and time again, is this spiritual, again, yogi type character who feels like he's merging with the divine through his running. And he also profiles like Navajo runners who do, spiritual running. And you don't get into these states of expanded awareness without really, I mean, maybe suffering isn't the right word, or people would use would take issue with that term. But I just use struggle because I feel like it's a nice midpoint between the two, where there is this energetic hump of discomfort that you have to surmount to see this strange fleeting beauty on the other side of it, and that really changes you.
Every bit of science mirrors your wisdom. And in the awakened brain, I share stories of contributors in our society. So, for instance, Tim Shriver, who leads the Special Olympics, he's a contributor, right? And Reverend Walter Fluker, who's the leading expert on the African American history around Howard Thurman and the Thurman Papers, which are, he's effectively the leading Black theologian, right? So these are people who are really doing good things. And every one of them tells their awakened story that as a young adult, they suffered, and they suffered deeply. And it was through the struggle that you describe that a breakthrough came, and they saw that, yes, I am worthy. Life is good. God is with me. Spirit holds me up. We are connected. They have a deep breakthrough. And it is through that lens of augmented awareness, it is through an awakened awareness that they go on to discern their calling and ultimately make their largest contribution. So, and these people are from all different walks of life. I mean, there's a fellow who runs one of our country's largest companies, a CEO, and there's a fellow, Stephen Rockefeller, who led the Earth Charter, which brought human rights one step further to Earth rights. So really innovative, loving, high impact work was born from people who had breakthroughs through struggling, reached awakening, and then used their awakened awareness to lead their lives. Yeah.
Do you have any inkling of what the best way to do that is, or what some effective ways to do that are? Because, you know, I'm not proposing that people have to like be extreme athletes or go to the Amazon and chug ayahuasca, even though I do think that that is a very powerful and effective tool. from my own experience, and I would say that that is the most nuclear distillation of what we're discussing that I've personally experienced, was just to be truly feel like I was in the depths, the pits, I was done, I was dead, and then to be pulled back out and
Mm.
just be so deeply grateful for the what was once the kind of beige mundane consensus reality that just wasn't doing it for me. Like the coming out of that and going back to everyday life was truly the greatest, most miraculous seeming thing I've ever experienced. But from a scientific lens, and in your personal experience, what do you think some of the best ways to achieve the requisite level of challenge are
Mhm.
to receive this benefit? Is there anything you know of?
Well, and as you suggest, it's a challenge welcomed, and then an openness, a curiosity, a sticking with it, um, to deepen our spiritual awareness and have a response to that. And as you point out, every tradition through time has led us through the desert to a deepening, and it's very often in this process of being in the so-called desert or literal desert and breaking through to the other side that we hit a level of awareness that then is always there for us. But it's not enough, as you suggest, to go home and say, wasn't that great? To return to life and use those same eyes to show up for our very own family back in our very own same house, to not say goodbye, I'm enlightened and you're left behind,
Right.
but to say, I see you with such love and I want to help you realize your deepest true nature, right? To bring that home.
Mm-hmm.
The
Mm-hmm.
hero's journey, right,
Yeah,
is what you're
I was.
talking about.
Yeah,
And of
yeah.
course, about the homecoming of it. Yeah.
Yeah, the return with the elixir. Yeah, that's exactly what you're talking about. And it seems like the maps, it's so strange because it's like the maps are there in every mythological story. I almost think there's this like unconscious human obsession to continue telling this archetypal story. I don't even think it's conscious a lot of the time. I just think that we're so intuitively eh, connected to that, to the the call to adventure, the refusal, the piercing into the fangs and claws of the wilderness and slaying the dragon and coming back with the elixir. Like some version of that, we just tell it over and over and over again, and it never loses its profundity. It never loses its profundity, and I think that's why, because it's something that we're all longing for and figuring out how to have a primary experience of. But again, all of everyday life almost seems like it's designed to like build a wall around that, like to build a wall around truly viscerally experiencing that deeper level of reality. And that's why I'm so grateful to people like you that are actually trying to do the science, which I would imagine is a very tall order, around how to actually understand this on a more practical level and get people to the point where they're not just talking about these things as concepts and ideas, but they're experiencing them. Like their brain is truly in this state that it needs to be in to experience what we're talking about. And to that point,
Well,
can we
need is
yeah.
exactly the word, right? That what you're describing as the hero's journey is not only um, something that attracts us, it is imperative. It is who we are. We are hardwired to need a hero's journey. And in
Mhm.
fact, I think based on science, we only come into who we really are and how we are designed to be built and flourish when we have a process of what I might call spiritual individuation.
Oh
You
yes.
look at twin studies, twins raised apart or twins raised together, and instead of looking just at one point in time, look over time at a longitudinal twin study. You see there are times where effectively a biological clock goes off in late adolescence, emerging adulthood, and ready or not, having been equipped or not by our society, we hunger for transcendence. We seek meaning. We are launched on a hero's journey.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that is how we are made. Now, unfortunately, as you say, um, 9/10 of society doesn't rise up to meet us there. And so we are left on our own. But if we can honor this process and find other fellow sojourners, whether it be the journey group, the fellowship, the minion, the sangha, right? Whatever our group may be, we do need a group in life, to have this process of spiritual emergence. It is the most important work we do in our lives. It is essential. It is biologically, spiritually, emotionally, in every level of analysis, essential to our formation. We can't get out of it.
Yeah. No, I so completely agree that it is the true calling, I think, of life, is to undergo this spiritual individuation you're talking about. And I'm really drawn to the philosophy of people like Jung and James Hillman because of this. And
And in fact, exactly as you say,
yeah.
Hillman and Jung said that the very same thing happens again at midlife that had
Yes.
happened in emerging adulthood. This
Mhm.
hunger, the call, whether or not we're told, whether or not we've planned for it, there's a hunger. And when this augmented spiritual capacity boots up, in twin studies, it's marked by a 50% increase in the heritable contribution to spiritual awareness. So there it is. It's gotten bigger and more vast. As we expand our capacity, it can feel at times like a half empty glass of spiritual fulfillment. And the existential void is what is nicknamed sophomore slump or midlife crisis.
Yeah.
But that is far too trivializing. This is our call to realize our deep nature as spiritual beings. And if we don't do it, we face a downward spiral of depression. We have no choice. Depression is a call to do this work. It is a developmental depression. Now, sure, there is a quarter, a third of cases are classic medical depression. There are people who have a piece broken and needs to be fixed, like as if they were diabetic. But the majority of cases are not psychopathology, medical depressions. They are the emergence of our deep soul, or told through science, they are a biological window in which we are compelled to realize our whole nature.
Yeah. That reminds me. The exact quote escapes me now, but I know Kierkegaard has a great quote about the sort of efficacy of existential anxiety, and it's exactly what you're describing. Is it's that that's actually healthy, because it's a sign pointing you somewhere. It's showing you what you're hungry for, but you have to build the fluency to understand what it is that feeds that hunger. And it's something that only each of us can do as individuals, yet like you pointed to, it does require a community. And I
Well,
often
but like you say, then we're not less, we're not weak, we're not
right.
broken. We are
Yeah.
called.
Yeah.
We are
Abs-
called. And depression makes us more if we say yes and answer the call.
Very important point. Very important point. Because if we're framing it like you're the victim of some malady, oh, you're helpless. You have no agency, right? You're the victim of this thing. You poor little thing. Will help you and give you some medicine and make you all better. Instead, you're like, no, that is the calling to the hero's journey, to fulfill your own purpose as a soul, like to fulfill your own purpose as a being here on Earth. I mean, that
Yes.
could there be possibly a bigger difference there?
To fulfill the ultimate point of being alive.
Mm-hmm.
It's the
Mm-hmm.
invitation of your lifetime, and it's the invitation for your lifetime.
Yeah,
And to
you're
think
giving
that
me
we
the
would
chills. You're giving me the chills.
nuke that away with SSRIs. Okay, I'll give you evidence that we're nuking it away, and it looks like this. Um, Over 50% of people who are receiving SSRIs do not meet criteria for major depression, dysthymia. They don't meet criteria. We are nuking away despair. We are nuking away existential struggles. And a third of people meet no criteria at all, no ICD, OCD, nothing. So, SSRIs are a way of trying to hotwire spiritual
Yeah.
awareness, but let's go back to the same study that I was sharing with you earlier. Those folks who in the road of life had suffered formed a spiritual core and were now protected against recurrence. Well, not only did we look at their brains using an MRI machine, we put a cap, an EEG cap on them, and looked at what came off their brain, how their brain was being used. And it turned out that the people to travel the road of trials, of suffering, and break through to a deeper awareness, and then bring that home into daily life, the hero's journey, gave off a very specific wavelength off the back of their head.
Yeah.
They gave off high amplitude alpha posteriorly. Okay. Now, high amplitude alpha is the very same wavelength given off if instead of recovery through the hero's journey, a deepening of soul, a discovery of spirit, we jumpstart the process with SSRIs. You can jumpstart
Hmm.
alpha, high amplitude alpha. The
Interesting.
problem is when you cut the SSRIs, goodbye alpha, it's gone, right? It doesn't have legs under it. So we're really
Hmm.
just hot wiring this process. Why is that important? Think back, as you say, to this deep story, the hero's journal that defines who we are. Well, alpha, the spiritually engaged brain giving off high amplitude alpha. Alpha has another name in another field, and it's Schumann's constant, it's Schumann's
Yeah. Yeah.
resonance,
Yeah.
which is the wavelength of nature. It's the wavelengths from the earth crust up 1 mile, the wavelength of life, the field of life. So when our brain is spiritually engaged, we vibrate at one. The felt sense of awareness is true. We vibrate with all life,
Hmm.
creation, nature, the field of life, consciousness.
Yeah.
The thought that we would short circuit the journey to find alpha, the thought that we would medicate away the invitation of our lifetime to connect with all life and feel as if we did and then pull it out from under us, right? That's the closest thing I can think of to harm. Iatrogenic harm is when you go into the hospital and you have, a broken leg and you leave with TB. They've made you worse. It is harmful when the invitation of a lifetime comes and we nuke it instead of honor the call to find
Hmm.
alpha. Yeah.
So, man, I mean, the the things you're saying are just electric. I truly got chills at a certain point there. That feeling of just like I'm subjectively know that I'm experiencing a deep truth through what you're saying, and I so deeply agree with you. Real quick sidebar: when you see those YouTube videos that say like Schumann resonance meditation, does that actually work?
So I cannot, as a scientist, claim to be expert on whether you can entrain or invoke the type of awareness that's picked up with a read of alpha through simply throwing alpha at someone.
Yeah,
If I
yeah.
hit a chime and it vibrates with alpha and your brain is entrained at alpha, do you go there? I can't claim one way or another, but I can say that if you are using your docking station of awareness, if you are using your awakened brain in such a way that you are giving off high amplitude alpha, it appears that you are at one with the field of consciousness, of life, of nature, of living
Hmm.
beings.
Hmm. Yeah, and I have personally experienced what it's like to be around other people who are in this open, kind of loving state, and it is a contagious thing. It is something where you enter that space with other people and you feel like, okay, it's safe for me to sort of surrender into this. And I think that again speaks to why it's so important to have that community. And it doesn't have to, I don't even think it has to be a community around any particular dogma or idea or philosophy, even other than like we're just here together on a deep level and you can just bring yourself here and you're welcome. And
And we potentiate each
yeah.
other's
Hmm.
connection with spirit, with the field of life, with consciousness. So, just as you say, science has shown in the awakened brain, I share a number of studies. I shared with you the Achterhoff study. I'll share with you a Newberg study. Andy Newberg showed that if you have 9 people in a deep state of transcendent awareness, prayer,
Hmm.
meditation, and the 10th person walks in, he or she more quickly moves into that state of awareness. That the consciousness that is invoked, held, shared amongst the first 9 is readily facilitated in its accessibility to the 10th, the newcomer.
Beautiful.
And that is marked by the rapid speed at which he or she shows mirror neurons. Just
Hmm.
like the 2 MRIs in Achterhoff study, they very quickly show the same pattern of transcendent awareness. So we hold together in group the field of consciousness, that yes, consciousness is everywhere, and at the same time it is intensified or concentrated or facilitated for one another when we come together in shared meditation or prayer, spiritual connection. And what you're experiencing is something that as you go out into the world, you are potentiating for other people.
Yes, yes. So I think you're pointing to something really key here is that if somebody's listening to this and they feel like I have a for sure lack of what you're describing in my life, try to figure out a way to get that into your life in some capacity. And I think for me, thank God, one of the things I probably unconsciously that got me into podcasting is that was feeling I was getting this through other podcasts that were like you know helping me learn new ideas and were hosted by people who are on the same journey of curiosity and meaning making. And I think maybe that's why I felt a strange pull to just keep doing this and keep doing this.
Well,
So
I would
so
even say that the
yeah.
consciousness that you invoke here now in the making of your podcast, yes, through the words and in and of its own potency, is felt and reboots those who listen. The
Oof.
consciousness itself that you invoke and hold here now is generously spread. And those who listen, your listeners, are rebooted, are reawakened, have a chance to flip the on switch for their awakened brain.
Mm, I hope so. I hope in some small way. So given that this sort of non-dogmatic sangha like space holding element does seem to be a really key thing, have you gone as far as to envision what a sort of more modern, maybe futuristic form of spirituality might look like? I mean, I often joke around about like some kind of like technodelic future where somehow, you know, technology is contributing to connectedness and awakening rather than like thrusting us deeper down our own individual self-obsessed reality tunnels. But it seems like we're a long way from that more knit together way of being. So have you given thought to that, like what the healthiest possible most sort of realistic
Mhm.
futuristic spiritual community might consist of?
I love that you use the word community. We just had an article come out within the past 10 days that
Oh wow.
showed that our spiritually aware brain, right, fires bright and strong and gets strong when we see spirit, when we treat each other with altruism, when we carry love of neighbor in our heart. Right? So the capacity to see one another, feel one another, show up for one another in this field of love and interconnection, to embody the spirit of life, right, is more than any other dimension associated with the neural correlates of spiritual awareness.
Hmm.
The spiritual brain is strong and well, and if you want to get it rolling, show up in community with love and care for one another. So I think community is essential. The Sangha, the Mingyan, the fellowship. The other piece is that we've had an awakened brain through all time,
Hmm.
right? But it's a matter of intention to engage in discipline and practice, to care, to use our awakened brain, that it really can lie latent or fallow. But we are wired. There's 3 loops in our brain, and it doesn't matter whether I'm spiritual but not religious, agnostic, atheist, Muslim, Hindu, Jewish, Catholic, it doesn't matter what. I use the same 3 loops in my brain
Hmm.
when I perceive spiritual reality, the awakened brain. And you want to hear them
Yes,
in
please.
brief?
Yeah.
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 The first is just as with children, we were held in our parents' arms, the
Hmm.
bonding network comes up online, and we are aware that life itself holds us. We are loved and held, just like as kids. And that is not a belief, it is a perception. We feel and know that. The second is that our parietal puts in and out hard boundaries. So you may live in Minneapolis and the next person may live in Chicago or New York, and you might be black, Asian, white. It doesn't matter how you're packaged or where you live. We are wonderfully diverse and distinct. And at the same time, there's a deep common seat of human experience. We are one.
Hmm.
And the capacity to put in and out hard boundaries and know that you have your own important, unique story to tell. And I can feel it and care and know because we have a common human heart is in the spiritual awareness. And the third loop has to do with our capacity to know that life has the answers that build into life as guidance. We
Hmm.
go from using a top-down dorsal attention network where I've got to get out the red door and I've planned my strategy and I'm going to go to this school and then get that job and I want to marry him or her, to wow, look what bottom up the ventral attention network has revealed to us today. And suddenly I meet someone I'd never met before, and my life opens up. And suddenly, because the red door was stuck, I shift and there's a bright open horizon through the yellow door. Right? The a priori decision making is based on everything I already knew from yesterday.
Yeah.
But the miracles in our life, the surprises, what makes life a grand, inspired adventure is to be awakened and see what comes now. And that capacity, the bottom up attention network, often is experienced in such a way that the right answer pops. So
Yeah.
we're built to use an awakened brain if we practice. And however we do that, it is the same awakened brain. I mean, it certainly makes religious war look antiquated.
Yeah. Oh God, to say the least. Yeah. Yeah. One of the other things too that I know that you're really steeped in. I saw that you had Martin Seligman as one of the people that did a book blurb for you. I believe you either did you teach or go to University of Pennsylvania?
So Martin Seligman was my doctoral mentor.
Okay.
He and I
Yeah.
used to
Yeah.
walk for hours and hours and hours each
Okay.
week, right when he was starting the positive psychology movement. Was when
Yeah.
I got my doctorate with him. Yeah.
That's what I wanted to ask you is that, so changing the perception from, this kind of this top down decision making, um, really kind of, I guess you could say type one kind of personality to this bottom up open, um, reflective way of being also seems like it's discussing a lot of the core principles of positive psychology in terms of like focusing on the things that went well, accentuating the positive in various ways. And that's something that I'm so interested in because it's so actionable and it's so I mean the results are so immediate when you shift into these gratitude based mindsets or these reflective mindsets. And I'm wondering, does that also contribute to what you're calling the awakened brain? I imagine it must.
So if we think of the awakened brain as a seat of perception, of transcendent awareness, it
Hmm.
potentiates our ability to see the world in a way that brings forth what you're describing as the transcendent emotions, hope, right? Awe, right?
Yeah.
The idea that we are built to be able to see that life itself is structured to be forgiving and redemptive. That in this living universe, not just an inert stage that we tread upon, but in a world with which we are in dialogue, it is a dance with us and life, right? There is a loving, guiding, regenerative, positive growth nature in life, built in life. And when we see that, we feel hope. And when we see that, we're in awe of how magnificent life is. And when we
Mhm.
see that, we actually realize that we're part of this symphony and we can show up with altruism and care and sacrifice for one another. So, yes, the road rises up to meet us, but we're trail angels for one another. We have to help each other along.
Yeah.
And I think that much of the side of positive psychology that is about the transcendent emotions that lift us, that elevate us, is an understanding of life that comes through the use of our awakened brain.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes so much sense. That makes so much sense. And I'm trying to put myself in the place of somebody who, they like the idea of everything you're saying, but they personally feel sucked dry. They personally feel like I don't have this altruism to give. I've been like depleted by obligations and,
Mhm.
you know, life circumstances that I don't have control over. What would you say to a person like that to start turning on, to start reorienting?
So this is yours. The awakened brain is not just for the most pious or the most proficient meditators or the most virtuous. This is who we are. This is our birthright. And it is a quarter inch under the surface. How to reboot our awakened brain. One way, which is, I think, quite beautiful, is that just as the engaged brain, the spiritually engaged brain, gives off high amplitude alpha, just like nature, if we step into nature and literally
Mm,
take a 20-minute walk, the spirit of life, the consciousness field, Schumann's resonance in nature entrains our brain. We are rebooted and we start to feel that we are part of life. We start to feel that we are part of some common fabric of existence with the trees and the birds. We start to reawaken. So walk in nature for half an hour and then start to notice that nature is regenerative, that even after a forest fire, there's little growth at the bottom, that an injured duck has a whole, healthy baby duck, that life is positive. So nature, but there are other ways too. And I think one way that's very helpful is to quiet our brain. Mindfulness can take us to the threshold, where we're then quiet, we've stopped the racket, to start to be open to witness what then is reflective, if you could say, scientists of life. We start to piece together. We start to see these magnificent confluences in our life, synchronicity. Why, of all time, did you show up now? Someone who is an innovative creator of a podcast understands this so deeply. And there's someone out here who needs this information, right? Why of all time now? So we start to notice the confluences in our lives that are far too unprobabilistic to have happened by chance. And when hardcore isolation and separatism gives way to a sense that we actually are connected in some magnificent, perhaps mysterious, but loving way, then whether or not we have a roadmap, we know we're on the journey. I also suggest spiritual visualizations. I share in the Awakened Brain one, and if you'd like, we could do it now.
I would love it.
Beautiful. I always credit the teacher who brought this to me. His name was Dr. Gary Weaver, and he worked with people who had felt very wronged by their faith tradition, so much so they didn't want to hear a word about it. But in doing that, they'd thrown the spiritual baby out with the bathwater, and he helped them reboot their birthright, Dr. Gary Weaver. And he did it through this practice, and he did it first with court-referred boys, kids who third time before the judge had a choice. You go to jail, adult prison, or you go out with Weaver into the desert. And put that way, they'd go with Weaver into the desert, right? And since he taught this to me, I've taught it to thousands of people, whether we're talking about healers, educators, investors at banks, people on the train suffering, whoever needs it. And no one has ever been offended because this practice is shared in the language of life. So we try?
Yes, please. Let's do it.
Okay. It's called Holding Counsel. Okay. And I'm going to invite you to clear out your inner space, take 7 breaths, and we'll do a minute and a half visualization. I invite you to set before you a table. This is your table. And to your table, you may invite anyone, living or deceased, who truly has your best interest in mind. Anyone living or deceased who truly has your best interest in mind. And with them all sitting there, ask them if they love you. And now to your table, you may invite your higher self, your true, eternal higher self, the part of you that's so much more than anything you have or don't have, anything you've done or not done, your true higher self. And ask you if you love you. And now finally, you may invite your higher power, however you may know, however you may call your higher power, and ask your higher power if they love you. And now, with all of those people sitting there right now, what do they need to share? What do they need to tell you? What do you need to know right now?
The tears are flowing for real.
I'm grateful. I'm grateful
I
that
am so grateful. I am so grateful. I'm so grateful to you for spending this hour. I would love to just keep waxing and wonder dipping with you all day, but I want to respect your time. I'm so excited for you and your new book, all the work that you're doing.
that practice
I
is in the
Yeah,
awakened brain as are others.
beautiful.
This is all of ours, and this is how immediate and accessible our awakened brain is for us.
Yeah, and I will return to that one and I will share that one. That is a really beautiful one. And it's just like you said, it's right there. It's just it's so immediate, at least for me. Maybe I'm just extra impressionable, but uh, I don't know how else we could leave it on a more profound note than that. But tell people everything you have going on. Anything else aside from the book you'd like people to check out?
Oh, well, thank you. So, the Awakened Brain is coming out now, and we have a few launch events, one with Deepak Chopra, one with Susan Cain, one with Marianne Williamson. I'm so grateful to be in discussions exactly as ours right now, where together we are seeding a more spiritually aware society. We're showing up for each other. This is all of ours, and we're working together, and we're going to get there. We are going to have an awakened society.
Endless love and thanks to you. This has been a truly, truly profound one for me. I, I mean, it's funny because you said, people out there need this. Someone out there needs this, and I was immediately thinking, I need this. I need this. So
We all do.
yeah, yeah.
No one's above it, no one's below it. This is all of us.
Thank you so much.
Bless you. Be well.
Bless you too. Much, much love to you.
Much that
Love. Hmm.
institutions crack, that governments fail, that the world can shut down. But what you do have, like a pilot does not control the weather, you can navigate and you can have a
Hmm.
deep way of being that moves in tandem with life. And we have to move from thinking we control life to thinking that with huge tsunami waves, we can surf life. We can be in tandem with life.
Yeah, yeah. I just recorded in the middle of that because what you were saying was just so well put. But for everybody listening, this is how fabulous and in tune of a human being Dr. Lisa Miller is. As I mentioned Terence McKenna's novelty wave theory, and she immediately sparked up with more excitement. Was like, we got to talk about this. And it's I mentioned this idea of the only thing I know for sure is that novelty is speeding up and the waves are getting bigger and bigger on our way to wherever we're going. And she just brought up a great point that we should all be aware of the fact that it's okay if we're not the ones steering the ship at large, um, and that we're ultimately headed somewhere. And I think that does kind of take some level of the load off a bit.
And that, life doesn't need to be safe and predictable and reliable. That we've just seen our institutions crack and fail, governments shut down, healthcare professionals are overwhelmed and unable to provide. There's no sense in which we are taken care of by institutions or society. But having let go of that illusion, we can find a deeper way of being in relationship to life. The pilot doesn't control the weather, right? It could be storming, it could be sunny and clear.
Hmm.
The pilot navigates. It's a dance of two. We are in tandem with life. And that's actually a far more empowering way to live.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Have you heard of the idea of strange attractors before?
Tell me more.
So this is another thing McKenna and the mathematician Ralph Abraham would talk about, is that could, and I think from Ralph's angle, though he is a philosopher too, he was like this math wonderkind, and I think he was a professor at Berkeley when he was like some preposterously young age, like 20 or something like that, teaching math. And I think he was a founding um, member of the whole like chaos math development at the time, if I'm remembering that correctly. But they together proposed this idea of, instead of, could it be that instead of physics or time is flowing in a direction, as we perceive like a first person trajectory from behind, that it's actually being pulled, that it's actually that there's some sort of strange attractor that's
Telos.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, yes, it would be like a teleological kind of thing, I guess, which is a word that maybe is academically out of fashion, but I think personally for me, it remains a heavy component of how I think.
Well, and so from that important seat of awareness. Meaning is not laid down on life. We don't impute meaning on life. Meaning is revealed. Inherent in life is a direction, is the guidance to a discovery. And so the best question we can ask is, what is life showing me now? And catch that with our deepest inner wisdom, our awakened brain.
Yeah, beautiful. Beautiful addendum. Thank you for suggesting to hit the record button one more time, and thank you again in general.
Thank you for this profoundly authentic experience together. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I have to have the last.